So as much as I love both of these movies, and as much as I love, I think that they're great Type 8 portrayals. I've been looking forward most to talking about our third movie, and that's Emily the Criminal. So tell us about Emily the Criminal.
So Emily the Criminal is an independent film that came out in 2022, didn't make much money at the box office. So it's available on Netflix, and it tells the story of Emily, played by Aubrey Plaza, who is a gig economy worker in LA, racked with student loan debt. She went to art school and dropped out. She has ambitions to, we see her drawing. We find out that she loves to paint. Her best friend from high school and from college works for a prestigious ad agency, and she's hoping to get an in there. In the meantime, her life is pretty shitty. So she lives in a grungy apartment with roommates that she doesn't even seem to know, and is just having a hard time getting ahead, and is basically backed into the corner of like, if I do this certain bit of criminal activity, I can make some easy money quickly. And starts doing that, even though she hadn't thought to do that before. An opportunity just drops into her lap. And then she gets deeper and deeper into that world, and things do not go as expected.
Yes, yes. And this may be the first thing I saw Aubrey Plaza in. I mean, I know she's been
Oh,
around for a while, and because this movie's only a couple of years old, it's I think 2020,
22.
2022. Yeah, so it's not an old movie, but she just was not on my radar for whatever reason, and but she convincingly plays a type 8 character in this movie, and I don't know that she's a type 8 in real life, right?
I would be astonished if she was. This
I
is
think
this is
so
the only
too.
time I've seen her play an eight. I've seen her in a
Yeah,
bunch of things.
and I've seen her in interviews since then, and she doesn't seem like an 8 at all, but she
Yeah.
was just so convincing at this character that had this been the only thing that I knew from her, I would have just assumed she was an 8 in real life, right?
So what popped for you as a shining moment of eightishness in her
Well,
performance?
it starts off right from the beginning, right? I mean, it's she's there for this job interview, and the guy tries to trick her, right? So he asks her about. He says, "Oh, we didn't look into your, background. So tell us about you. Do you have a criminal record?" And she talks about a drunk driving charge, and he says, "Oh, so you're not going to mention the assault that you had too, right?" So he kind of tricks her, and she just, she's not having any of it, right? She's like, who do you think you are doing this to me? And I mean, she basically, throws it in his face and, and, accuses him of being duplicitous, all this stuff, basically goes to tell him to go F himself, right? And so forth, right? So she just, right from that beginning, that is just an 8-ish response. Okay. And you see this throughout. I mean, I've got a whole list of things here. But what's fascinating is she's a small woman, right? Whereas with Jackie Brown doesn't seem small. I have no idea how tall Pam Grier is. Certainly Charlize Theron does not seem petite, right? She's a tall woman, I believe. But Aubrey Plaza seems petite in this case. She's thin, she's small. She seems physically vulnerable, but just hard as nails at the same time, right? And so she is clearly somebody under stress, somebody who's worried about her future, right? Somebody who's worried about how am I going to get my bills paid? How am I going to survive? How am I going to make this work? And so you start to think, well, wait a minute, this character's kind of vulnerable. But then when the need for action comes up, she just jumps right in, and it's not out of character because the way they kind of explain her approach to the world is in a very 8-ish way, right? And you'll hear her say things like, for example, the assault was because she had a boyfriend. She said, we used to fight all the time. It went too far one time and he called the police on me. And the problem is that I didn't go far enough. If I had scared him more, he wouldn't have gone to the police. And I was thinking, whoa, you go, girl, right? I mean, all right, man. And it's kind of that if you're going to touch the king, you kill the king mentality that, she has and that 8s have, quite frankly, right? It's like, man, if I'm getting into this, we're going all the way. And this is what you see in Emily the Criminal. So we're going all the way.
And that exchange happens right near the end,
Hmm.
right as she's about to, I can't remember, is it right before or right after the final attack on the gangster? But anyway, she's
Yeah,
very
I think it's right
stressed at that
before.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's so stressed that I thought that was an interesting element of it too. It was like, what does stress do to an eight? It makes them wish they'd taken revenge harder.
Yes.
Like my only mistake was
Yes.
not being vengeful
Yes.
enough.
Yes, and she says to Yusuf, so just to kind of set the stage here, so she kind of develops this relationship with Yusuf, who is the kind of again a nine-ish sort of character who is, the low tier criminal as part of this criminal enterprise, who is being intimidated by and eventually betrayed by these tougher, more eight-ish gangster characters. Okay. And he almost, and it starts to unravel because she makes the mistake of going twice to the same store, and they're worried now that she's going to get caught, and so they got to take care of her before she can get arrested and then squeal on them. And at one point he almost, when he realizes that his plot to get revenge on these guys isn't going to work because they got to the money first, he almost wants to blame her. And she's like, no, 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 no. If you had stood up earlier, right? If you had attacked back earlier, then you wouldn't have this problem, right? And again, it portrays that mindset of the best defense is a strong offense, okay? Of, you know what? We're going to go to war at some point. So I'm going now, right? Which is what we see in Emily.
And that's what ends up happening at that point in the plot, too,
Yes.
is like, not only did you not assert yourself enough before, we're going to do it right now
Yes.
because Khalil, your cousin, who's an
Yes.
eight, thinks you're weak. He won't be
Yes.
expecting this. So
Yes.
she leads the charge.
Yes.
And without them actually showing the conversation where it happens, there's not a doubt in my mind that she comes up with a plan of like, here's what we're going to do, and here's exactly how we're going to do it,
Right.
because she incorporates her experience working as a gig economy food deliverer
Right.
into the plot to lure out one of the guys and to get access to the house where they're all waiting inside. She's in charge of this, and she's exactly right. They don't expect him to be assertive. They don't
Yes.
know that about her, even though earlier when Khalil meets her, and she lips him off, saying, "What did you say about me? Say that again."
Yes.
Khalil's impressed of like,
Yes.
oh, I like her. She's
Yes.
got more balls than you.
Yes.
It's very much an eight taking the measure of somebody saying, like,
Yes.
you're tough. You're defying me in this moment, and I like that.
Right.
You got some stones. You stand on your own 2 feet. Well done.
Right.
I'm still going to betray you. I
Yeah.
still will dominate you. But
Yes.
like, hats off to you in this
Yeah.
moment.
Right. Yeah.
And then, of
But I'll,
course, at the end of the movie, she's holding a knife to his throat and getting the money from him.
right. Right.
Again, a story of revenge.
Yes. And so there were a couple of things there. I mean, first of all, I remember the first time I watched it and thought it even more this time. But when Youssef says, well, in the morning, I'm going to go steal the money from Khalid, right? And I'm thinking, what the hell are you waiting for? What do you mean in the morning, right? And of course, by the time he gets there, Khalid the eight had already taken everything, right? So he wasn't waiting at all. So it was that interesting little piece of it. But one of the other, I think, great scenes that establishes this character is when she gets robbed early in the movie by the couple who kind of show up at her place. They do one of these, arrangements where she's going to sell something to them. And so they show up at her apartment. She makes that rookie mistake of inviting people to her apartment instead of, a neutral place, is what you're supposed to do in these cases. And so they throw her to the ground. The guy's holding the box cutter to her throat. She's terrified. They take her money, and you can see her panicking at first, right? The first thing she
And they
does is
take the dog.
and they take the dog that she's dog
She's
sitting.
she's dog sitting for her best friend. The dog's
Right.
in a crate and they just take it.
Right. And so the first thing she does when she gets up is runs to the door and locks it, right? Because she's still feeling terror. And then maybe 15 seconds goes by and that terror turns to rage. And she says, no, no, no. And she goes and she grabs the stun gun and she runs out there and she stuns the guy and scares the crap out of the woman, threatens them, right? Of,
Takes
takes
her
her
driver's
driver's
license.
license and
Yeah,
says,
I know
right,
where you live.
right. And, you know, and she turns into just a badass, but again, in a believable way, right? I mean, it's interesting. As I was watching this, it actually made me think of a woman that I've known for years who is a type 8 woman, who actually looks like this character a bit. And I can just see her doing all these things, right? I mean, it just, you know, it just struck me as such a real character.
Um, Another thing, another bit of eightishness that I saw in there is self-assertion. So early on, the first crime that she commits is credit card fraud, basically. So the character, what's his name, Yusef, who's the lower level criminal that we talked about,
Yeah.
has come up with this scam where they have stolen credit card information. They imprint new credit cards. They create fake ID for various people who then go in and buy items from a Best Buy or a different kind of electronic store, and then they sell it to the criminal who gave them the thing. So she reaches out to Yusef and says, "Show me how to do this." And he shows her how to print fake credit cards and then how to use them and how to do this on her own. And she does. She takes this operation and it becomes a one-person operation.
Right.
So she is practical and she takes it into her own hands, which, as you said, leads to this incident where she's robbed. And then she takes that into her own hands of like,
Right.
no one's going to get the best of me.
Right.
So she isn't simply like the way they've set it up. A character, not this character, but a character could just be involved in that first dummy shopper scam, as we've seen, and then continue to do exactly that
Right.
and think like, I can make 200 bucks in an hour. That's pretty good. That's enough for me.
Right.
Not her. She's like, let's do more.
Right.
And let's be my own boss.
Yes.
And that is ultimately the resolution of the movie.
Yes.
Because in the end, everything goes to hell, but she escapes with the money and her life and then crosses the border. And we're in some unnamed Central or South American country. And she has started her own dummy shopping scam.
Right.
And she's addressing a group of volunteers using the exact language that
Right.
Yusef
The
was,
same script, except
this
in
exact same
Spanish.
script, except in fluent Spanish. And as you said, she's a small woman, and yet she
Right.
sits there, knees apart, kind of leaning forward,
She's got,
full eye contact.
yeah, she got the man spread going on, right?
Exactly, of like, I'm in charge here.
Yeah.
If you're not okay with this,
Right.
you can leave now.
Right.
This
Right.
is how it's going to go. Who's on board?
Yeah. Yeah. There's one more piece of this that struck me as very eight-ish. Or no, I'm sorry. Here's where I wanted to go with this. Um, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you the instinctual bias because this is a flat out navigating character, right? I mean, for all the reasons that we've seen in the others. At first, I was thinking could be kind of preserving, right? But um, two things come to mind for me that make it a navigating character. First of all, when they were talking about what her aspirations are, it was all about going out into the world, right? Seeing the world, exploring things, understanding things, tasting the world, and being autonomous, right? So it's this I want to be free so I can go out and see the world and experience it and taste everything it has to offer. Okay. Not in a lustful kind of way, in a curious sort of way, right? I just want to know what's out there. Okay. So there's that piece of it too. But the other
And
thing,
just to jump
yeah, go ahead.
in, if
Yeah.
the character had been a preserving eight, how might she have expressed what she wants? Because at one point, Yusef just basically blatantly asked her, "What do
Yes.
you want in life in
Yes.
general?"
Right.
What do you think a preserving eight in that same position in life might have
Yeah.
answered?
Security, stability, resources, right? It's all about, I want enough resources so I can build my castle that nobody can violate, right? So the preserving eight is it's a nester, right? It's I am going to build my fortress. Okay? Whereas the navigating eight is a rover. I am going to go out and see the world. Okay. So I have a home base, but it's not a fortress necessarily. It's a camp. Okay. Which is the difference. So it was the distinction there. Okay. So for her, getting money was only so that she could be free and go out and live. Okay. Um, the other piece of this was that this movie is all about identity. right? And I don't remember catching this the first time I saw it, but the pivotal scene, because when you think about the title, Emily the Criminal, where does that come from? There's that scene where they're having lunch with Yusef's mother, and she's asking her, "So what do you do?" And she says, "Well, I haven't figured that out yet." She goes, "Oh, that's okay. You'll find your gift. Okay. Maybe you'll be Emily the teacher. Maybe you'll be Emily the nurse. Maybe you'll be Emily the whatever." And she realizes, hey, you know what? I'm really good at this crime stuff, right? I'm really good at this, and I am Emily the criminal. Okay. So this movie is all about identity. Okay. It's all about what is my social role in the world and how do I find that and how do I live it out? So for me, again, that's what the navigating domain is all about. How does this world work? What's my identity and how do I fit into it?
To add to that, I see this movie as having a really prominent theme of preserving,
Okay.
which might make it easy to
Yeah.
see this character as a preserving aid, but for
Yeah.
all the reasons you say, it doesn't seem so.
Yeah.
But she is crushed by the economics of the system
Hmm.
in that she has racked up $70,000 worth of student loan debt. And in a phone conversation we found out earlier, the money that she's able to pay on it simply goes to the interest.
Yeah.
She's got a criminal record, which prevents her from getting many, many jobs.
Yeah.
She lives in a shitty apartment with shitty roommates. It's not cartoonishly bad, but it's mediocre enough.
Yeah.
And she's able to accurately see of like, I'm not going anywhere. Like there's little to no hope of getting out of this.
Right.
And then when she finally gets an opportunity to interview at this ad agency where her best friend works, it comes out into the interview that this is an internship
Yes.
and that she would be working for free, full-time hours for 5 to 6 months, after which she might be promoted into a paid position. And she just immediately says, I can't do that. And how dare you
Right.
expect that I could do that? Which brings up the overall theme of like how the system is rigged against people who don't already have money. Like the only person who could work that internship is somebody who's got a trust fund, somebody who's got somebody, whether it's a romantic partner or parents, who will bankroll them.
Right.
So she's just very aware of like, my options are very limited like this.
Yeah.
And being a criminal is one of the only options available to me as somebody who has a criminal record. That's one of the only jobs I can get
Yeah.
where that's not going to disqualify me. If anything,
Yeah.
it's an advantage.
Yeah. And had this character been anything other than an eight, I think a stronger case for the character being preserving could have been made. Okay. But one of the things I see in Navigators is um, so Emily's life was kind of a series of bad choices of indifference to what's the smart thing to do here economically and from a security perspective, right? So yes, taking on too much debt. Yes, making bad choices of, driving drunk and, beating up the boyfriend and these sort of things. And what I see in preserving eights is this single-minded focus to not get into that sort of situation in the first place, right? To be deliberate, intentional, and very disciplined around money issues. Now, this doesn't mean that, preserving eights are not going to struggle with money, but I got the sense watching this that her financial difficulties were as much certainly due to circumstances, right? I don't want to say there's any one thing or that I'm disagreeing with anything you said, but there also seemed to be this inability to understand the financial game of life, right? Which is
Right.
something I see in navigators and not preservers.
A
Okay.
preserver would know how much of their student loan payment is going to the interest.
Exactly right, and they would have a preserving eight would probably have a pretty good plan in place to make sure that those bills are being paid on time and all that sort of stuff.
Or have chosen to go to a different school that didn't
Ex-
have the high tuition, or have
ex-
just not gone to college. Of
exactly,
just like, oh, I'm not getting into that trap.
exactly. It's
No
exactly
thanks.
right. Exactly right. Yeah.
Whereas a navigating type, as you're saying, might be more prone to just not thinking about that. Of like,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, it's just money, it's just debt, I'll figure it
Yeah.
out.
I'll figure it out. Right. It'll all work out. I'll figure it out. I'll make it happen. I'm not going to lose
I'm
any
me.
sleep over this. Yes, exactly right. So, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anything else about this movie and Type 8 that you want to comment on?
Yeah, well, just one more thing about preserving. One of the comparables that came to mind as I was watching it was Of Mice and Men. One
Mm.
of the plot threads in it is at one point Yusef is talking about how there's this condo he wants to buy. And, they go and they visit it.
Hmm.
And he's making enough money from his low-level criminal activity that looks plausible. And and he's an immigrant from Lebanon.
Yeah.
Like in some ways, it's the American dream, kind of like George and Lenny of Mice and Men, of like, we're just subsistence farmhands. But if we
Right.
set aside a bit of money, there's a bit of land we can buy. And we can farm for ourselves, we can work for ourselves, we can live off the fat of the land. And there's very much that hope with Yusef and Emily of like, maybe I can buy this condo. Maybe we can build up a nest egg. Maybe things will be financially okay.
Right.
Just like in Of Mice and Men, that gets taken away quite tragically.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Interesting. Yeah.
one more
Go
thing
ahead.
about Emily as an 8, sensitivity. So we talked about this with Furiosa in terms of her care for the women that she's rescuing. In this, there's the care that she has for the dog she's looking after, for one thing.
Right.
It's like she makes a point of rescuing that dog when that couple comes and gets
Right.
her. Also, one of the first crimes that she commits, the second one, is to buy a car with a fraudulent cashier's check and credit card.
Hmm.
And then she very narrowly escapes. And she takes a punch to the face and she's got like a bloody nose as she comes to the end of it. She gets away. She gives the car to Yusef. She throws the keys at him. And then we see her walk away and then lean up against a parking meter and dry heave,
Right.
which again is a nice three-dimensional portrait of an 8. She's
Yes.
tough. She's assertive. She's also a human being.
Yes.
And violence is not fun,
Right.
even when you win. It's disconcerting. It fills you with adrenaline. It's distressing. And just get this out of me.
Yeah.
Get me out of here. And then she allows Yusef to give her a ride back to her own apartment and to create an ice pack and put it to her face to stop the swelling.
Right.
It's
Right.
like she's made of flesh and blood. She's not made of stone. And a lot of people think 8s are made of stone. It's very easy to create a caricature version of an 8, whether it's in a movie or in someone
Right.
and think that they are not actually flesh and blood human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think for me, it's one of the things I liked most about that movie is that it captured that full dimensionality of the character, like you're saying, right? And people who are familiar with the Enneagram will say things like, "Oh, well, an 8 would never be scared, or an 8 would never do this, or that sort of thing." And that's just not true. They're human, like you said. They bleed and they throw up and they're terrified, and when it makes sense to be terrified, but then they snap into action, right? And that's kind of the distinction there
When they
is
need to.
when they need to, right? That adaptive strategy is to attack, okay, instead of cower. And so I really liked that about the movie. And for me, it's one of the best depictions of an 8 I've ever seen. I really think so. Um, and it also brought to mind, I don't know the director, but I am going to look for more from the director who he also wrote this script, and Aubrey Plaza produced it as well. But I'm going to look for more from him. But it reminded me of then this character reminded me of another kind of type 8 character, Linda Fiorentino in The Last Seduction. I don't know if you've ever seen The Last Seduction, the John Dahl movie. Highly recommended. Her and Peter Berg. She's just a scary, tough, 8 seductress, a transmitting 8. And you can see the difference, the seductiveness in that quality, the overt sexuality in that character that is missing in these navigating 8 characters, right? But again, it's a kind of a smaller budget movie, incredibly well paced, just a great story. Highly recommend that. But it's kind of one of the things I thought of as watching this movie. Probably sometime in the early 90s that came out, but worth a look.
Something I'd add is that I think there are just too few women 8 roles out there.
Yeah.
And if any writers or directors or producers are watching this or listening to this, take that as a tip of like, this is not territory that has been explored to death. And there are
Yes.
a lot of rich stories that are yet to be told about women 8s, and they are wonderful. And whether the actor is an 8 in the first place, like Pam Grier, or not, like Aubrey Plaza or Anya Taylor-Joy or Charlize Theron, like these are rich roles
Yes.
for actors to play, and audiences love watching them. Like,
Yes.
give us more of these, please.
Agreed.